Hello everyone, Owen here, and you're listening to In for Black Archive, our podcast where we're trying to go through the entirety of Doctor Who back catalogue. This is just a quick heads up to let you know which on Wednesday we'll be releasing a short special episode to see what we think will be coming up in for new special broadcasting on Sunday. And then on for Monday, we'll be discussing what we thought of the newest episode. But until then, enjoy this episode looking at the Ambassadors of Death. I hope you've got your ambassadors ready because it's time for death. It's time for the In for Black Archive review of the Ambassadors of Death.
I hope you've got your ambassadors ready. What am I, as a nation state? Do I? Hold on a minute. Let me actually think through what, like, the logic and logistics of what you've just said.
Yeah.
So I have to have ambassadors for a start.
Yes, you do, yeah.
And they have to be primed and ready.
I mean, who doesn't?
Who doesn't have ambassadors?
Have ambassadors on standby. Hello, and welcome to In for Black Archive, where we're here, not live, but we are in person. James is sat directly in front of me. If I wanted to, I could stroke his face, but I will not. But instead, we are going to be talking about the third coloured Doctor Who special. Not really a special, but you get what I mean. It's the Ambassadors of Death. So I hope, James, you have got your ambassadors ready because it is time for death.
It's the fourth try on. I hope you've got your ambassadors ready. So yes, welcome to this discussion of international diplomacy and death.
It's not international. It's planetary diplomacy.
I suppose it is planetary diplomacy. There is an exchange going on. That's one of the big things.
Yeah, but before we even touch on that, I want to blow your mind.
I'm happy you said mind.
I said this was our third coloured Doctor Who episode. But that's wrong, isn't it, James?
Is it? Are you right? How are you considering this? Because if you count the Peter Cushing stuff, then of course this isn't the third in colour Who story there is.
Did you notice the quality of the colours were different between episode 1 and the rest of the story?
I suppose I did, yeah.
That is because we don't have any... Actually, we do have one, but we'll go into that later. We don't have any original colour copies of that first episode.
So they've had to be post-colored. They've had to be post-coloured. They've had to be post-converted from black and white copies.
Yes, but do you know how they did that?
They didn't do the really paper process they used to do, where they had to get artists to actually colour it in frame by frame.
No, it's actually a lot more clever than that. So essentially, how they filmed the black and white version. So essentially, they always would film a black and white version of a colour format to send to overseas nations where they didn't have colour. Yeah, didn't have colour
because this was in that transitional time.
But there's a bit of an anomaly when you film the coloured TV into black and white. You get these things which are called chroma dots.
Yeah,
and essentially, the reason why we've got this colour is by mistake. Because normally, what they're supposed to do is filter that out because it makes the black and white look shit. They didn't, but they were able to analyse those chroma dots and give us some sort of colour. Yeah,
so they were able essentially to reverse engineer it. Yeah. I think that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah,
and turn it back into the colour.
Yeah,
quite clever.
Yeah,
really.
So there is one known original copy. I say original as in like it's original from BBC. It's actually just someone's recording of it onto a terrible colour tape. But those colour tapes are broken and have got a lot of rainbow effects. So that's not what we're seeing here because it just doesn't work.
Yes, they've had to sort of create a natural colour by making an educated guess, I suppose. Yeah. Does the educated guess play off? I'd say it does.
Yeah,
Didn't notice it.
I did, but also I knew about it.
Exactly. If you know what you're looking for, you'll always find it.
Yeah. But I think one thing I noticed with it is that on episode 1, so essentially we're set in this massive sort of like space agents, space centre kind of thing, and there's a speaker vent. In episode 1, it's gold. After episode 1, it sort of goes into a dirty silver.
Well, colouring sort of half worked.
Yes.
At least we can say.
But now we've gone through the technical stuff. What were your initial impressions of this episode?
So this is the narrative discussion. I do want to preclude this narrative discussion by saying that initially Owen did a take of this where he said that this podcast was being recorded live, which implies that some of the podcasts we've recorded together weren't done live, as if like, you know, one of us recorded our bit 12 hours after.
We have done that once.
Have we ever done... No, but I genuinely mean, have we ever had a conversation that's not been live?
Technically, yes.
Yeah, okay. If you count the magic of editing, where we've maybe changed some things.
No, so... First of all, our trailer.
Okay, but the trailer's not a podcast. That's a trailer.
Yeah, but we essentially couldn't arrange a time to record it together, so I bodged together old clips because we pre-recorded like 3 episodes. I bodged together clips of that into
Yes, you did.
something which sounded relatively normal. But then also, at the start of the podcast, I think it was for the Comic-Con announcements, we couldn't find time to talk together live.
Yes.
So we kind of did this fake conversationary thingy.
We half did, didn't we? Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it? How did we do that? Did you end up sort of asking a series of questions and then I just sort of sent you some answers across?
Yeah.
All right, okay. Then maybe...
So we did technically do it. It wasn't an entire episode, yes.
All right, fine.
But
That's
we
a
have
good
done
point.
something similar to that before.
We have done non-live. So this is a good old live in person. We also watched this episode together, all 7 parts of this. It's quite rare we get to do that.
Yeah.
So that was enjoyable.
I now literally live on the other side of the country. In a different country, actually.
Yes, in a whole different country, in a union that is slowly breaking apart at the seams. But overall then, this episode is a lot.
I think around the 3-episode mark, I said to you, this episode's getting too complicated for its own good. But did it manage to uncomplicate itself into some sort of storyline towards the end?
But that was only because they sort of had to focus on the pure essentials of the story for the ending to work. There was so much convoluted plotting that got us to that point, so that when you got to that stage, you didn't realise you were really at the ending, because half the time you didn't really know what to follow.
Yeah.
It's a very cluttered story, this one. And I think you were telling me before, this doesn't, in terms of the classic Who story pantheon or hierarchy, this isn't reviewed very well.
So the writer of this episode, David Whittaker, says this is his most hated episode which he's written. But there's actually a reason behind that on his side, which is he barely didn't write any of it. He didn't actually write much of it.
So it was sort of passed through different writers, but credited to him at the end, which is usual practice, I should say.
But I've just been reading just now. This was actually originally written for Jamie McCrimmon and Zoe.
Oh, so this would have been this was essentially an offcut of season 6.
Yeah.
That was then repurposed later on, which is, I mean, when you consider it's been repurposed from a Doctor Who episode where there is a TARDIS.
Yeah.
That's pretty good going.
Yeah, it's actually... I don't see how this would work with Zoe.
No, not really. Which almost explains why it's been passed through so many different writers, because I imagine the changes would have been extensive.
Yeah.
To get that to work. Particularly because you've got Lethbridge Stewart, who may or may not have been present in the original draft. John Pertwee's Doctor definitely wouldn't have been.
Yeah.
Liz Shaw definitely wouldn't have been. The unit dynamic, the being on, because in case you haven't listened to the podcast we've done before, we're very much in a newish Who this season.
Yeah.
Everything's had a fresh lick of paint, quite literally, this colour now, and feels very different. So it's quite impressive in some ways that this episode even exists, because it's essentially been written for a different programme. So does it actually translate across, in your view, to being a good episode?
As in this episode now?
Yeah. This is The Ambassadors of Death now.
I think it starts off and goes really over complex, but I think as it goes on, it sort of starts to settle down a lot more in something which makes sense.
Yes.
I think it's made a lot easier to understand by just the fact which... It's made a lot easier to understand by fact which... Essentially, it comes down to our main villain of the piece, the General. Just double-crossing pretty much everybody he wants to.
Out of a sense of moral duty.
Yeah.
Very moral, very dutiful. I'm with you, really. the issues you've got is that it's not until about episode 5 that you really get a clear sense of what the narrative is. There's a lot of active questions, potentially too much, not a lot of clear answers, and then it feels like the script just keeps on adding in plot points when really it should be streamlining.
It's very much, in a bizarre way, what Flux could have been.
I suppose so.
If they were able to end Flux properly, it would have been very much Flux-esque, as in that Chibnall kept adding more and more elements to it.
Yes, until he realised it was over.
But then, unlike in this story where they do... I mean, I quite liked this ending. It wasn't that bad.
I think the ending is fine. Yeah, it's a bit sudden.
Yeah.
I'll say that, but...
It makes sense in story sense, doesn't it?
Yes, it resolves everything. Even if it does it very quickly, but it does remind me a little bit of Flux in the sense that it felt like they all of a sudden had to have an ending.
Yeah,
and so they put one in there. It worked, but it didn't feel like they'd really built it up. And with a 7-parter, you've got the room to have a bit of a 5-10 minute epilogue, whereas this really does just get out.
Yeah, it straight up the Doctor does his typical. Right, we're leaving now. Goodbye.
Yeah, he's done. Oh, I've sorted this, and he's off, and that's it, and the entire thing ends. And you think to yourself, if you've got 7 episodes, surely you can pace things out properly to have a bit of pace, have a bit of a better pace in that last episode. It confirms in my mind that the whole thing was a bit botched and a bit rushed.
I think,
and they're trying to pack so much in.
In a bizarre way, it's got the this is too many cooks scenario of there's too many different writers somewhere involved in this.
Yeah, it does feel a bit of a hodgepodge. In some places, it's hard to get what the central story is. But what is easier to get is the characters, because we haven't changed those.
So the Doctor, should we start with Doctor?
Yeah, we can start with John Pertwee. Yeah, this is a story where you just feel like once again this Doctor is coming into his own. He's finding his personality, and what his personality is sort of similar to Doctor Who and the Silurians, which is the last one we covered. Very direct. Very focused. Not a lot of room for joking around, really, with this Doctor. There's some, and it's welcome, but it's always in the right place. When something serious is happening, there is not a serious joke. He's also mastered the ability to speak like every public schoolboy in 1970. The amount of old chaps this man drops for being a Gallifreyan is pretty shocking.
But my favourite one is when he comes up against opposition and he just shuts them down.
He does have he's very well written, I think, in terms of the language he gets to use. I think the best word to describe John Pertwee's Doctor is pithy. He is more than happy, rather than to prove you wrong, to cut you down before you get the chance with a witty remark or an aside. Yeah.
I think the one which I'm particularly thinking about is the one between him, Cornish, and the General. Where they're kind of just having an argument about who's in charge of the base, that kind of area.
Yeah, he just has this ability to cut straight to the point, not mince around.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you notice is, once again, this is the action hero Doctor. This is the Doctor that does stuff. This isn't the Hartnell Doctor that sort of said, oh, well, we must do something. Ian, why don't you punch that man?
Yes.
This is the Doctor who goes out and punches the man if necessary, even though Lethbridge Stewart can do that. Yeah. It's a different kind of action those two do. You know, we get to see Alistair sort of punch people and have a bit of a fight, but the Doctor's action is always the big, heroic, daring thing now, when it never used to be.
No. So you mentioned him there. What do you think about Lethbridge Stewart?
Yeah, we can talk about Alistair. Just a joy to watch.
Yeah,
he's always good to watch, even when there's not a lot of good in the episode. There's good things about Nicholas Courtney.
Can I just say, in this episode, there's not really much for companions to do.
No, Liz, I mean, we can talk about Liz in a minute, but her narrative is pretty much capture, escape, capture, escape, capture, escape. Alistair's sort of on the sidelines. He's doing his own investigation, really. There's very few scenes that Pertwee and Courtney get together in this story. They're mainly on their own paths, figuring out this huge, vast conspiracy with all sorts of plot points that you lose very quickly. They're figuring that out in their own way. And so by the time they meet up, they sort of know each other's, sort of the other half of each other's stories. And so by the end, it sort of aligns for both of them. But yeah, this is probably the first real example I can think of the Doctor Who team going, okay, we've got our new team. What happens when we split them three ways?
Yeah.
Because for the most part, these characters are on their own solo stories for the majority of it.
And also, just on for Doctor and for Brigadier's sort of relationship, how do you feel like the aftermath was handled between the ending of the Silurians? Because it is mentioned here.
It is mentioned, yeah, which is a good example of the Doctor Who team recognising that there is a crossover now between episodes. They can't really cut out of stories.
They're not in silos, are they?
No, they're not in silos because he doesn't get to leave that environment. So those things have to be hang-ons. It's mentioned briefly, but then after that, it's sort of, okay, we've mentioned that now and we go on. It sort of reverts. It'll be interesting to see whether in future episodes the morality question that was brought up by the Silurian ending becomes more important to the stories themselves, and whether that means more conflict between Doc and Brigadier.
But it's very much colleague-like when you and your colleague have a disagreement, and then the next day you grab a cup of tea and you're back to it.
You go, okay, well that happened, but we move on because we have to.
Yeah.
And both of those characters are very much in the stiff upper lip category, I guess. They both just move on, get on with the job at hand. You know, Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart is one of the most stiff upper lip characters.
Yeah.
Probably in the history of fiction. He's the ultimate example of, well, get on with this then. And they do. And then Liz.
Yeah. I think what she does do in this is very good, because we're not... I know last time I complained, which she is a top scientist, but she kind of got shoved to do the paperwork. This time, she does do the science. She does get kidnapped, but she isn't a sort of damsel in distress. She just gets
most of
on
the time
with
she's
it.
planning her own escapes. And...
She's attempting to work out ways to escape, or she's doing the science which she's being asked to do and told to do.
And we also get a bit of backstory with Liz. I mean, there's that nice thread they have with Dr. Lennox, who's one of the enemy team's scientists. He's been, drafted in possibly against his will to do this. And we find out that Lennox and Liz have met before on different projects. And so Liz is known in that world, which is good. It means that she has more of a lived-in sense. You feel like she exists outside of the episode.
Which is partly why I think for our end-of-season special we're going to get rid of the best setting, because it's all big one setting.
We're building one world.
Yeah.
Which is a total contrast to how it was. And so far, I think they're doing a pretty decent job of it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of common threads between episodes. For example, one thing I've been noticing is that there's a surprising media presence in all of the stories we've watched. Yeah. Like, it does get brought in there, and there is a unified sense going on. They're trying to build like a rounded picture of what this sort of event would do on Earth. How would normal human people react?
Yeah, because a big element, particularly in episode 1 and in the last episode, we've got a TV journalist there who's got the smoothest voice you've ever heard.
Oh, he's purring down the mic.
Yeah.
Bit like this. Sort
of showing off. Actually, it's a really nice way to explain to viewers the context about what's happening, particularly in that first episode.
Yes, that is really... It's not the smartest exposition. It's fairly cheap, but it's very well done.
But it works.
It's like a Big Mac.
Yeah.
It's cheap, and it's cheap, and it's probably microwaved up, but it is nice.
And I think it helped with that, which it's done well and it works.
Yeah, it works within the context of the story.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel out of place. Nothing, I would say, feels out of place. It's just there's a lot of stuff that is in place that crashes into each other. And so, particularly in those opening episodes, you're trying to get a grip of what really the whole mystery is. It's almost too mysterious for its own good.
Yeah. And just one side character I want to shout out as well. Cornish.
Yes.
He is our side character. He is in charge of the space expedition. But the thing I liked about him was the fact which he was critical of the Doctor, but he did the opposite of what we've had previously with these scientific, like we had previously with Dr. Lawrence. He's critical of the Doctor, but then starts to realise he is right here. He does a Lethbridge Stewart. and just rolls with the punches and becomes a really good ally of the Doctor as the story goes on.
Yeah, Cornish is a really good character. Like, a really good character. One of the highlights of this. Because I think most of the time when we talk about the side characters on Who, they're usually the big showy ones.
Yeah.
Like, they have a great big thing. Like, Maxtable has his whole kill thing and his want to turn everything to gold. Even Dr. Lawrence in the last episode we did, going on and on about being in charge of the facility. Those are really memorable, easy things. Cornish is good because he's sort of a humble character. There's nothing too distinctive about him.
Like, he's very realistic. Like, you can definitely see
you
this
imagine
person,
him in the real world.
You can imagine this person doing this job, coming across this scenario. Whereas, say, with Dr. Lawrence in the Stylorian episode, you don't really... I don't think someone in that
He's
position
a caricature.
would be so thick.
Exactly. Those characters, even Maxtable, who I love, are caricatures.
Yeah.
They are highly dramatised, wouldn't really exist in our day-to-day lives. But Cornish is the sort of person that you can imagine being your manager at work or something like that.
Yeah.
He just sort of feels like he exists. And you get a sense that he's very emotionally invested in what's going on. I think one of the big issues we've had in Doctor Who stories before, when we've had like a management structure at an organisation, and we've had a lot, is that it's less about the thing, it's just more about their own feelings, like they're trying to make themselves feel good because the thing is successful, so I will feel good. Whereas Cornish is, well, I want the thing to be successful so that it's successful.
He at one point outright tries to get over the head of a person like in charge. I've forgotten his name. Quinn?
It's the Democrat, it's the government guy.
Yeah.
Quinlan? James Quinlan.
Yeah.
That's his face.
He essentially goes, "You're trying to stop me doing this. If you do stop me from doing this, I will go for press.
Yeah.
And thank you very much, goodbye."
He takes the decisions I think a lot of people would, and he takes them selflessly.
Yeah.
Sure, he's got his own ends, but in the reality, Cornish's motivation is to save the astronauts.
Yeah, because
they're his responsibility.
The entire setup for this episode is that we've got some astronauts which are stuck in space.
This is probably a good jump into the story, to be honest.
Yeah.
We can just go straight in.
Yeah, because the story is essentially based around, we've got some astronauts who went to Mars who got stuck. So we've got a recovery rover going up. We get introduced to it this way here. We've got the astronaut going up to save them, bring them down to work out what's going on. And then issues arrive.
Yeah, so there's a probe that goes up 7 months before the story with these two astronauts, and suddenly communication cuts.
Yeah.
Got no idea what's happened. 7 months later, with the world enveloped in this mystery, they send this other probe up, and that's where we kick in, and this probe suffers the exact same fate.
Yeah.
Communication suddenly cuts with no explanation as to why. Naturally, the Doctor is watching it in his TARDIS TV, which is something we've not seen before.
Yeah, he's
TARDIS TV.
His office lab space.
Yes, he's turned the TARDIS into an office. It's interesting that Liz goes in there. We don't get any she doesn't get the whole it's bigger here thing.
I think it's because he removed the console from the TARDIS and just shoved it into a standard office.
Ah, that would make more sense. Quite clever, actually.
Yeah.
It's like a big it's like a big ornament.
Yeah, to try to sort of like repair it. I think it's the first time we see the TARDIS console in colour.
Yes, it is.
Episode
it is definitely, because we saw in the first episode in Spearhead, he goes into the TARDIS, but we always see it externally.
Yeah, we've only had external shots of the TARDIS.
Yeah, so nice to see it internal, or at least inside out, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, naturally, Doctor Concerned runs over to the base and tries to figure out what's going on. There's this screeching noise, this signal that's been played over. It's not quite like that. It's more like a siren than a dying cat.
Oh.
We'll get to the dying cat episodes of Who eventually. You just wait till Colin Baker. We deduce quite quickly that this is a signal, and it's someone or something trying to send a message.
Yeah.
But, and you're going to hear a lot of me saying this, we kind of lose track of that plot point because all of a sudden we get all this stuff about a wild conspiracy.
But we don't know. We do come back to that point.
I mean, yeah, we come back to that point, but there's so many points we go through to get there that your head gets scrambled.
Yeah, so we go to try to solve that, and we have our first twist, our first cliffhanger, which will be completely duplicated around 5 times during this story.
Which is
we will never see the end of it.
Which is the hello character. I have a gun and I would like to shoot you with it. Smash cut to ooh. Ooh.
Yeah.
And this really does happen constantly. It's like they couldn't find another way. The only other unique cliffhanger I can think of is Liz Shaw dangling over a dam.
Which is then instantly picked up from, and then we move on.
Yes, and it really is kind of a pointless endeavour.
Yeah, it really is just a case of...
No, this was fine, actually.
Yeah, we just need the cliffhanger here, to be honest with you, mate. We just need this, you know.
You can just tell that it was kind of botched into the 7-part structure, and yeah, I'd be interested to have been a fly on the wall at the writers' meeting. I'll tell you that.
Wait, we need to end this episode now. We've got Liz running across the dam. How do we end this? This is a really intense fight.
What if it
scene.
looks like she's going to fall in the water, but actually
falls
she's not really a threat?
She falls over the edge. Done. We've done it here. We've done it here now, folks. Goodbye.
Yep, and done. There's a lot of episodes like that where it just feel like sudden endings
Happen and they're kind of placed in an odd way. Yeah, so outside of the whole there are potentially astronauts in space and potentially aliens up there's a great big plot going on the ground involving, there's like a French scientist is involved in this and a whole bunch of petty criminals, and then there's this ridiculous thing about burying bodies in a quarry, which doesn't really add anything to the story.
It does.
I didn't think it did.
It's the they essentially so essentially the entire thing is based around the ambassadors of death. That's kind of what they give. We don't really get the name of the aliens, but they're essentially the aliens.
They're referred to as ambassadors
the
of this race, yeah.
Who get captured by the general, who essentially wants to kill them all off because he's scared of them. That's the entire plot point, essentially, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
He's scared. He went up on the Mars rover. These guys accidentally, it's kind of put across, killed his colleague.
Yeah, not realising that they would do that by touching them, which is a convenient one.
And the general is terrified of them, so he wants to kill them. The ambassadors of death are radioactive because they live off radiation, essentially. They feed off it. So essentially, they wanted the heavies to come into the base to grab the ambassadors, shove them into a van, but they didn't really want those heavies to know about them.
Yes.
So conveniently, they get told, go in there, they won't hurt you. They probably don't hurt them. The radiation does. And then they kind of need to get rid of the bodies, so then they go into the quarry.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole trick with this episode is that you're led to believe that the astronauts have been recovered.
Yeah.
For a while, but actually they're the ambassadors.
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of like the theory that goes around, at least, is that they're the astronauts and that they have been infected essentially with this radiation.
Yeah.
That's made them basically feed off it like the aliens do, and they can kill you with one touch.
Yes.
But around that, there's a lot of diplomacy and a lot of. It feels like everyone's sort of in on it. Like the government's in on it, the general's in on it, the scientists are in on it, the criminals are in on it. It's a great big thing, and I don't think anyone really understands, with the exception of Carrington, what the point of it is.
Yeah, everyone kind of has their own
reasons,
rationale behind taking part in this conspiracy. Like, I think the only one who genuinely sort of knew, which wasn't the general, was the computer technicians whose name I've forgotten, the French scientist.
Oh, Tartagnan.
Yeah, Tartagnan. I think he might have had a clue about what was going on.
Yeah.
But other than that, we've got people out there who's in it for their own gain, really. We've got the politician,
James Quinlan, yeah. He wants the glory, essentially, of staging a first contact.
Yeah, he wants to stand there with the cameras not shaking these guys' hands.
Doing air kisses.
Yeah. Look, we will live peacefully with these people. The main heavy, essentially just wants them to steal some banks.
Yep.
And
then,
then,
they would like to just do crime.
And then there's just a load of random side heavies which just kind of exist.
Who all have their own. They're all at their own ends, but it's Carrington who's brought this crew together without telling them really why, because he has his own plans. And as the episodes go through, we go up that chain of command, I suppose, until we end up at Carrington and we recognise that he is kind of the mastermind of it all. But all of that is clunky to explain. And if it's clunky to explain, it's clunky to watch.
It's clunky to explain because they keep twisting it into different stories. Like, we first learn of All for Government is involved because these people have got... I've completely forgotten what they called it now. Something radiation. Continuous radiation.
Yeah, it's just self-sustaining.
Self-sustaining radiation. But then that's also a lie. We've got other people in there. But it's only really explained what's going on towards the end of it. And it's just a lot of confusion on top of a lot of confusion.
Exactly. And then because you've already got all this plot, the decision to split the Doctor, Liz, and Alistair feels like a bad move. I understand it because you've got so much plot that you have to investigate it from all sides. But the problem with that is you've already got 3 stories going on and they've all got complicated plots. Mm-hmm. And so there is just too much going on in the first few episodes. And it is only until around episode 5 where we realise that we're sending the Doctor into space to investigate this that we find the story, I suppose. It's only at that point where we hit, okay, that's the central goal now.
This is the twist. This is the real twist. They are just there to be ambassadors. They want to help us.
Yeah. So shall we fly straight over towards that? Mm-hmm. Because towards the middle of the episode, it becomes clear that the only real way to find out what's happened is to send another recovery probe up. And this time, the Doctor is the pilot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because essentially, you know what? If we've had a situation where 3 pilots have gone up and we're not entirely sure if they've come back down again, no other pilot surprisingly want to go up there.
Yeah, but, you know...
Shock horror, really.
The Doctor's like, whatever. He'll do it. So he does it. And...
First time this Doctor's been in space?
Yes, the first time this Doctor's been in space. So it's good for him. Nice for him to get sort of back in his habitat. Seat. Back in the driver's seat.
Yes.
He's been driving all season. He's got that car.
Oh, good old Bessie.
Good old Bessie. I love that. I love the sequence where Lethbridge Stewart has to use Bessie to get to the character's base. That is funny.
Yeah.
There's a brilliant smash cut they do of, you know, well, the Doctor partner's car. And he cuts to him, he turns around and goes, what? And he has to suffer the indignity of being in that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice way to address the fact is that Lethbridge Stewart and the Doctor in normal circumstances would never be friends.
No.
But they are...
It's a standard work thing, isn't it? How you've got people who, if you met them in the park, you'd never speak to them.
No, if it was your own choice.
But because you sit next to them, you kind of become friends. You develop this good working relationship.
They've been pushed together by circumstance.
Yes.
And that's what's led to this. Yeah, so he goes up, the Doctor, in another recovery probe, gets to the Mars probe from before, locks in with it, and then mad old stuff starts to happen. There's a sort of 2001 A Space Odyssey style sequence that emerges where he gets teleported into the alien ship. He then finds all the astronauts who all...
I don't think he's teleported in.
See, I always thought he was.
I
it was
thought
like
he was
beamed in.
I thought he was just knocked out and then kind of woke up inside the ship, which I'm assuming got kind of enveloped in sort of like its loading bay.
The only reason I say against that is because the aliens can't touch him. So they couldn't have brought his body in physically.
I don't think they did bring his body in, did they? I think he woke up on the shuttle. In the shuttle.
Yeah, well, he found a way.
He wakes up in the shuttle because we've got
he is always in the shuttle, isn't he? Because the astronauts are there.
We've got the bizarre step thing where he kind of levitates down.
Oh, that is hilarious! Yeah, it's like a really early green screen.
Yeah,
like really cheap green screen, but that's just what they did at the time.
It's basically, I think essentially what they did was they had him like standing still. And they just lowered the camera down an inch, which made it look like he kind of levitated down.
I have to say, this is a bit of a tangent, but I think we should do it. There are a lot of excellently bad bits of production value in this episode that are cheesy in the best possible way. Mm-hmm. There's a particular sequence I like where what was the name of like the main heavy in the enemy plot? He wanted to use the ambassadors just as killing machines.
Yeah.
Really, he didn't have any other desire other than his own gain.
Mm-hmm.
But he's almost like the second in command Yeah, massive asshole.
I think Regan.
Regan, that's his face. Yeah, I liked Regan. He seemed just on the right side of deranged, where it wasn't too over the top.
You could definitely believe him of just going, oh, I've had this thing shoved into my arm which make me able to rob banks. Let's go do it.
He's a bit power hungry.
He's perfectly believable of just, let's just abuse what we've been given here.
Exactly, and he does. There is a great sequence where he's sort of running up and down some stairwells, and there's guards there. And his approach to taking guards out...
fighting scenes.
His approach to taking guards out... So Owen, how would you, if you had to take a guard out, how would you, get that out of the way? Because you don't necessarily want to kill him, like...
You mean you just double-footed kick him off the railings?
Yes, that's exactly what I do. Yes, he... the only way to describe it is he Bruce Lee's them...
Yeah.
Off of railings. And there's some where he sort of gives them a gentle push, but then there's a sudden camera cut and he's 6 feet closer to the edge and suddenly flips off it. The fighting scenes are pretty shocking. Even the easy to film ones
there's some where
bad.
Where you can go, yep, that fist was around 10 foot away from his stomach.
The only thing they are missing, ladies and gentlemen, is pow, bam, wallop cards.
Yes.
Going in between them. Yeah.
So what else is there to discuss about this story then?
The ending, because we're still kind of on that. So he arrives on the ship, doesn't he? And then the astronauts and all there, all fine, thinking that they're watching the football.
I mean, why not?
Why not? And they believe that they are actually on Earth, but they're in quarantine. They're in an extended quarantine and they're waiting to be let out. Obviously, they're not. The doctor tells them they're not. They're like, oh, are we not? And then all of a sudden the aliens just sort of reverse that out of their memory very easily.
Yeah, they're under some sort of mind control, because I'm not convinced that TV was actually showing
No,
football.
it wasn't. It was just sort of...
Lights.
They were seeing what they were told to see. It was a bit like the Time Lord depiction in the War Games, actually, because this race that was never named was made to look very powerful.
Yeah.
Like, very, very powerful. And they were a peaceful race, but, they were fully willing to mess you up if you did anything against them. And once the Doctor and them chat, they get a little chat, we realise that the folks in the suits who've been radiating people to death with one touch are the ambassadors of death.
Ambassadors of death, but they are there for peaceful reasons.
For peaceful reasons, yeah.
They are slightly misnamed here, aren't they? It feels a bit bad calling them the ambassadors of death, because they straight up go, why are you holding us
the ambassadors
captives?
do kill a lot of people.
Because they're being forced to.
They are being forced to, they do it. So, from one perspective, they are ambassadors of death.
Yeah, but they're trapped going... They essentially, they don't communicate. The big plot point is that the Doctor enables them to communicate, and they essentially go, why are you holding us captive? Why are you making us kill people? We're just here for peace. We're ambassadors.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a bit just like getting diplomats to go around and do murders, because that's just the way it is. And we soon find out that the astronauts are being held there because the ambassadors are being held on Earth. And so an exchange is proposed. Our ambassadors, your astronauts.
Yeah.
And we'll forget this ever happened.
And which is essentially what happens. There's a bit of overthrowing of people, but then we all come back at the end, all happy and dandy.
Yes, everything gets resolved. Carrington gets arrested. He doesn't get like the proper comeuppance old generals used to. Remember, they just used to die in terrible ways.
But I feel like, yes, this ending was rushed. Don't get me wrong, this ending was a bit rushed. But I felt like it was earned. It felt natural, like a natural conclusion to things. It came up to...
I do agree.
It came up to... It was a countdown scenario. We didn't really have a clock, but it was a countdown scenario of the alien essentially went, we don't get our ambassadors back, we're
blowing you up.
And for generals, they're going, we will kill them. So we kind of had a combination of separate timelines, countdowns going at together. So it ended fast, but it felt like the story was setting up to end fast anyway. So it felt like it was natural, which is why we're talking so fast. It's because we really was just a quick ending, which was so
yes, I agree.
So well made.
It's very sudden, but it just doesn't overstay its welcome. The story is over. They just don't overstay it much longer. There's no real point to reflect.
I feel like the only thing which I would say to make the ending better was, as you say, have a little bit of a prologue at the end.
An epilogue.
Epilogue at the end. Just because it does feel a lot like of a Doctor going, right, there you go. You should get your astronauts eventually. They'll send them down.
Yeah, she's like, right, this seems sorted. I'm off the fuck up.
But wait, Doctor, I need some help. Oh, no, Liz will be better for that. Goodbye. Have fun.
Yeah,
I'm
we'll
off.
chat. We'll chat tomorrow, folks. Like, it's not a big deal. We'll see what's happening tomorrow. And that's the end of the episode.
Yeah.
All 7 parts of it. So overall, then,
Yeah.
what's your feelings? And how would you rate it?
Probably around a 6.
Give it 6.
Because it is very watchable, but it suffers from the same issues that Doctor Who and Silurians had, which is that it's just a tad bit too slow.
Yeah.
But it also has on top of that the fact which it is so complicated at points for not much reason. That's why I'm going to give it a 6.
That's fair enough.
It's similar sort of level to Silurians, but with that just a tiny knockoff point.
Yeah, Silurians felt a bit more consistent.
Yeah.
And a little less convoluted and had a clearer story. Oh, yeah. I'm going to give this a 5.
Yeah.
The reason is that it is just so choppy and so rushed. There is a lot to like about this story, and I think you can name multiple things that work really well. But I think they've tried to pack too much story in. Actually, sorry, let me rephrase that. They tried to pack too much plot in.
Yeah.
And they've not got an awful lot of story. And so you feel like you're just going between plot points a lot of the time. And because the characters are split up, not only do you lose that dynamic they were building up, it sort of feels like they traded that energy in to do this. I mean,
there's an entire episode where I'm not entirely sure Liv was actually in it.
Yeah, all in all, it's very choppy.
Yeah.
And doesn't quite get clean. Towards the end, it does, though. And so I'm willing to give it that middle score, because it does fix a lot of those issues later.
Yeah. It does conclude nicely, unlike for Sensorites, where it does just kind of feel like it...
Yes, and there is our Sensorites reference for this episode.
We get paid by Sensorite endings.
And the administrator was dealt with.
Yes, and so was this episode. So, thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed what you listened to, please remember to subscribe.
He's looking me dead in the eye.
Subscribe now, James.
If you could only see into Owen Cranston's eyes, you'd feel compelled to run away from that subscribe button.
Run towards that subscribe button.
Got to give it a warmer look if you want them to run towards.
Yep, but James, how could they contact us?
If you want to chat to us about all things Doctor Who, all things classic Doctor Who, or anything Ambassadors of Death related, you can do that via Twitter at Black Archive Pod. That's got no spaces in it, as most Twitter handles do, now I think about it. And you can email us on blackarchivepod@gmail.com, which is more relevant to say that there are no spaces, no caps.
You've never guessed what? There's no spaces in emails either.
No, there isn't. Why do I say these things?
All I know is that it's time for the end of this episode. So goodbye.
No caps, no spaces. It's just like a thing people say. No caps, no spaces. Doctor Who's got a lot of faces. We're on the 3rd one now. Will we ever get to the 13th or billionth one based on Chris Chibnall's thinking?
This is whatever happens when we get hold of handheld microphones. Goodbye.
That's good.